My name is Thomas Reid. I'm a 68-year-old widower from Seattle. And for most of my life, I've learned to keep my success quiet because I never wanted money to be the reason people respected me. And after losing my wife 10 years ago, silence and simplicity became my comfort. But nothing prepared me for the day my daughter Emily brought home her new husband. A man named Ryan who carried arrogance like perfume, thick, loud, and impossible to ignore. The first time I met him, he shook my hand with 2 weak fingers, glanced at my worn jacket, and said, "So, this is your dad?" As if I were some outdated furniture she forgot to throw away. And although I noticed the way he looked at my old pickup truck, my simple 2-bedroom home, and even the shoes I wore, I stayed calm because I didn't want to embarrass my daughter. But that night when I overheard him whispering to her, "Your dad's kind of broke, isn't he?" Something inside me twisted, not in anger, but in disappointment, because wealth never defined a man. But Ryan was too shallow to understand that. What he didn't know was that behind the quiet clothes and the old truck was a man who spent 40 years building a tech consulting company from nothing. A company I sold 5 years ago for more money than Ryan had probably seen in his entire life. And that I lived modestly, not because I had to, but because I preferred a life without noise, without people pretending to like me for what I owned. Still, the man kept underestimating me at every visit, calling me sir with fake respect, cutting me off during conversations, explaining simple things to me as if I'd never left the 1970s. And worst of all, telling Emily that her future would have been brighter if her father had achieved something, not knowing that my name was still engraved on the wall of a company headquarters he probably walked past 100 times without realizing its meaning. I stayed silent for her sake until one afternoon when they invited me to dinner at their new home, a place they could barely afford but bought anyway to impress others. And when I walked in wearing the same old jacket Ryan hated, he smirked and said loudly, "Emily, grab Dad a plastic plate. Don't want him dropping the good ones," and the entire room laughed. Except Emily, who went pale, embarrassed, and hurt. But before I could say a word, Ryan added, "Don't worry, Tom. Once I get my promotion, we'll help you out so you don't have to keep living, like that," waving his hand at my clothes as if I were some charity case he was planning to adopt. And that was the moment I decided enough was enough. I let the dinner continue, quietly observing him brag about his small junior position at a tech firm. Talking about high-level decisions he clearly didn't understand. Flexing his watch that cost more than his savings. And acting like the smartest man in the room, until he said something that finally snapped the last thread of my patience. Some people just never achieve anything big in life. And that's okay, but I'm aiming higher. And he looked directly at me as if he were giving a motivational speech to a failure. I leaned back, took a slow breath, and said gently, "Ryan, you work at Westbridge Innovations, right?" And his chest puffed up instantly as he said, "Yes. One of the biggest companies in the state." And he continued bragging until I interrupted him with the quietest sentence he had ever heard. "I founded that company." And before he could laugh, I reached into my jacket and placed an old key card on the table, the original founder's access card with my name engraved. The one employees used to salute when I walked past because I was the man who built the entire system he now pretended to understand. The room went silent and I watched his face shift from disbelief to shock to something close to fear. And Emily stared at me with wide eyes, whispering, "Dad, you never told me." And I simply smiled and said, "Because I never wanted you to love me for that." And Ryan stuttered, "Wait, Thomas Reid? The Thomas Reid?" And I nodded, watching his arrogance melt like ice under fire as his posture changed. His voice softened and his fake confidence crumbled. Suddenly, the man who mocked my clothes, my life, my age, and my worth was sitting straighter, speaking softer and trying desperately to recover, saying, "Sir, I didn't know. I didn't realize." And I stopped him with a raise of my hand and said, "Respect shouldn't depend on what someone owns." And Emily grabbed my hand tightly, her eyes full of pride instead of embarrassment for the first time since she married him. But the lesson wasn't over because right then my former Michael walked into the restaurant coincidentally, recognized me instantly, hugged me, and said loudly, The legend himself. The man who made us all millionaires. And Ryan froze like a statue while the entire table turned toward us, listening as Michael continued. You should see the plaques with your dad's name still hanging in the headquarters. And Ryan looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. But the real twist came when Michael shook Ryan's hand and said, I've seen you around the office. You're the guy who keeps messing up the database logs, right? And the look on Ryan's face was pure humiliation. When Michael left, Ryan avoided eye contact for the rest of dinner. And when we stood up to leave, he tried to carry my jacket for me, offer me his car keys, ask for advice. Anything to undo what he had done, but I stopped him and said calmly, kindness cannot be performed. Either it exists or it doesn't. And Emily finally understood everything, the disrespect she ignored. The arrogance she justified, the way he treated me was how he would treat anyone he thought was beneath him. They drove me home in silence, and later that night Emily came back alone, tears running down her face as she hugged me and whispered, Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't see who he really was, and I told her gently, people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching, and over the next weeks. Their marriage cracked open, not because of me, but because Ryan's true nature became impossible to hide. He belittled her, dismissed her dreams, and expected praise without effort. And eventually Emily made the bravest decision of her life and left him, realizing she deserved a partner, not a performer. Today she's rebuilding her life with strength and grace, and as for Ryan, well, when word spread at his office about who I was and how he treated me, let's just say promotions stopped coming his way, respect faded, and his arrogance had nowhere left to hide. Sometimes the world teaches people humility, but sometimes the truth simply removes the mask. And when Ryan saw who I really was, he didn't just lose my respect. He lost Emily and the future he thought he deserved.